Hi, my name is Pashu Christensen. I'm with the Hive. I'm just going to say a few words about the Hive and the Hive think tank. And then we'll have Oliver come on stage and do his presentation about the Sentient enterprise. So the Hive think tank is the largest community of big data thinkers, practitioners, data scientists, engineers, developers. It's one of the largest community in the US focused on big data. We've hosted events since 2 years now, a little bit over 2 years. So we've hosted over 150 events. We host them every week at different locations in the South Bay, in San Francisco, and on the East Bay. We have over 6,500 members, and you are part of the members. So thank you for being part of the community. And we hosted over 200 speakers. Those are our next events. Make sure to register before I announce them to the public because, as you know, it fills up very quickly. And so on April 1st, we are really happy to host Mike Olson on the Hive stage. So as you know, he's the co-founder at Cloudera. And then we have a very interesting panel discussions with thought leaders from Google, Flickr, MetaMind, Baidu, and a moderator from VentureBeat. So make sure to come at these events. We'd like to thank our sponsors tonight, especially NetApp for hosting us. Pentaho, who is here behind, they have a tabletop today, and they actually have a raffle. And make sure to go by the tabletop, drop you business cards, and we'll do the raffle at the end of the event, where you can get a Jambox. So basically, it's a smart speaker. And of course, we'd like to thank Teradata tonight, especially. A few words about the Hive. So the Hive is an early-stage data-driven startup incubator. We invest in companies. Basically, we focus on data-driven applications across online, IoT, and enterprise. We invest from 1.5 to 3 million in each one of these startups, and we work very closely with the entrepreneurs. So that's our model, and we like to call ourselves a studio. You might have seen in the press, we just closed the Hive 2 and raised 22 million. So we are right now looking for entrepreneurs to start companies with us. So make sure to reach out to us if you have exciting ideas to share. Those are our startups. Recently, one of them, Kosei, was acquired by Pinterest. Deep Rice Media was just acquired by Rakuten. We have a few announcements coming up in the coming weeks, so they are being very successful. Also, we are starting a summer program at the Hive, and we are recruiting interns, so reach out to us for that too. With this, I'll let the stage to Oliver. He's with Teradata. And he's one of the leader, and he started the concept of the Sentient enterprise. You used to be with eBay and which other company? eBay and Sears. And I'll let you introduce yourself. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Okay, good evening, everybody. Honored to be here. Oliver Ratzesberger, yeah. So I run software development basically at Teradata. If we can set that maybe back to, first page. I run software development at Teradata, so Senior Vice President of Software. I've been with the company almost 2 years now. I joined in July 2013. I've been 9 years here in the Bay Area, 7 of which was with eBay, and I was responsible for the data platforms. Anything that we started out with a little data warehouse to more and more data to behavioral to all of a sudden like petabytes and tens of petabytes of data, right? Things like Project Singularity, things like integration of Hadoop with relational technology. That's what we really focused on. What I'm going to tell you today here is a story that over the last 1.5 years, I had the chance to work with Mohan Shani. He is a lead professor at Kellogg School of Management. And it started out about 1.5 years ago when we met, and I told him the story of what we have done over the last 15 years with data, right? And a lot of it was based on like, okay, the eBay, we did this, and we had a problem, and we need to solve it. We need to get to the next stage, right? And we really started iterating on top of that, and he started challenging me, right, to say, you know what, this is a bigger story. This is really a capability model. You have built capabilities to solve business problems, right, that a lot of companies have out there, and just buying a technology or bringing in or downloading some technology doesn't solve the problem, right? That's just the beginning. You need to change culture, and you need to do something about that. And so for the last 1.5 years, we have been working together. We came up with that maturity model that we call the Sentient enterprise. And it's a 5-stage model that talks about how do data-driven companies really become data-driven. And it's using advanced analytics and embracing that. And it's less about what version of what software and what hardware do I install, and much more about what do I need to change within a company, how do I need to change the thinking to adopt these kinds of technologies and ultimately implement them at scale, right? So with that, let me go in there and tell you a little bit about what we're looking at here. This young gentleman, his name is Robert Ney. I'm not sure if you know him or have heard about him. He has quite a remarkable story. About 2-3 years ago, he launched an app on the iTunes App Store that got to 400,000 downloads on day number 1. He pushed Angry Birds to the number 2 spot, right? And so that's a high schooler that barely knows how to write a software that can deploy 400,000 pieces of something on devices that he has no access to. Think about that, right? All of you in IT that are being asked that tomorrow you're going to install your whatever you have written on 400,000 devices, you're going to start sweating, right? And it's going to be nasty, right? Yet we have these examples out there. And how did he do it? He downloaded an SDK. He downloaded something to work on top of an app platform, right? And we have seen this evolution of technology. And nowadays we often talk about this exponential progression, right? Not only are computers getting faster, the way we can integrate and operate them is getting so much different and so much easier. We're on this exponential wave of technology is accelerating. Right? Yet when you look into a lot of our IT shops, right, what we do with technology, we kept up with it somewhat in the 90s. We got behind it in the 2000s. And nowadays, this thing is running away on us, right? And it's really interesting to see what platforms have done and how we need to think about that. Having said that, of course it comes with big data, right? I mean, many of you think big data. There's a whole economy around big data. And yes, when we wrote that, it was 1.8 trillion gigabytes. Today, it's like 3.6 trillion gigabytes. And every 18 months, this thing doubles. This is, by the way, more bits than there is stars in the known universe, right? So yes, there's a lot of data, but that's actually just part of the problem, right? So let's look at how we consumers have grown up, right? Everything is real time nowadays. I remember when 16 years ago I moved to California, I opened my account with Wells Fargo. What did I get at the end of the month? A paper statement that showed me what I had in my accounts. And in between, I would write down in my checkbook what money I had spent, and roughly I would get it, right? Nowadays, think about that. That would be unacceptable, right? The app, the web, I want an SMS about anything, everything in real time. Your sports scores, your flights, your travel, anything that you do, right? You want it in real time. If you go to an e-commerce website and you don't see the inventory in real time, you turn around and go somewhere else, right? Real time is really big. Again, look at yourself, look at IT, look at technology. Not so much, right? We still have a lot of systems that run weekly and daily batch jobs, right? Real time is scary, real time is big, right? And it's like, okay, well, real time is just the beginning. The other part I call self-service everything, right? I mean, it was okay 10 years ago to go into a banking branch and talk to a teller. Nowadays, well, no, not really, right? I mean, even going to an ATM is kind of out of the way and boring, right? I can take a photo of the check that I want to deposit with my cell phone, and it's deposited, right? So self-service has gotten to a point where even call centers are no longer good enough, right? Who wants to figure out what options to push on the phone, right? Or talk to an IVR system that doesn't understand my broken English good enough. So I have to wait 20 minutes in line before I can talk to somebody, right? Now think about what that means internally. How many of our IT shops, IT departments are good at that? In many cases, you will find ticketing systems, right? My favorite example is we had to copy some data around within eBay. And my worst example was it took us over 6 months, and it was 137 tickets later that the data was finally copied. Why? Because every ticket has a 7-day SLA. Well, of course, you forget some things, right? And on day 7, it gets closed because you didn't provide all the information. Open a new ticket, right? And then somebody looks at the ticket and says, oh, by the way, you're crossing 2 data centers. You need to talk to the firewall guys. There's 15 more tickets you need to open, right? To open these ports here. That's the infrastructure that we live in. Yet consumers live in a self-service world, in a real-time world, right? Quite often we are faced with very simple questions, but very challenging ones in the business, right? We have to deal with data anarchy, right? All of you know that you probably have hundreds of copies of data out there, right? And depending on who you ask, they will direct you in a different location. We use a lot of humans to direct data. We call it ETL, right? We take data out of one system and stick it into another system. And I've just seen a company earlier today, they said, well, yeah, we stick it into this system, then we do some calculation, and then we stick it back into the other system. And then we take some of that and stick it into this system, and by the time we have a spaghetti code of dependencies that nobody understands anymore what it's working, right? We do a lot of sifting through data. I mean, whoever has built BI dashboards, right? Or visualizations, or algorithms, it doesn't matter what it is, where the output is looked at by a human being. The problem is, how many times a day do you look at that output? And how long are you going to still look at that output? Or when do you give up on looking at it? And all of a sudden, like, you miss some big events or trends happening because you didn't have enough eyeballs on the right data, right? We humans don't scale very well, right? Doesn't work well. And out of that comes a lot of fire drills, right? The CEO needs data, right? Wall Street needs data, right? The 2 presidents can't agree who has the right data. You guys figure out why our data is the right one and their data is the wrong one, right? It weighs down on organizations, right? Especially in large organizations. A lot gets done or not done anymore because of that. And then there is this wonderful concept of let's just do an enterprise data warehouse, stick all data in it, and the life is good, right? And the whole economy, or the whole industry, however, I think got this wrong, right? The enterprise data warehouse was an interesting idea in the 1990s to get all data together, right? But we made one crucial mistake. We looked at how do we write software, what do we do in IT shops, and we all had our wonderful product development life cycles, our waterfall, write a requirements document, and then we spec it, and then we design it, and then we architect it, and then we data model it, and we ETL it, and then we BI it, and then 18 months are gone, right? And that question that was relevant last year for Christmas is irrelevant. Business has changed. Economy has changed, right? Those of you that with all of us went through the year 2008 know how much the economy can change like this, right? And all of a sudden, everything you had queued up for months and years to come is irrelevant. It doesn't matter anymore, right? Too slow. Everything that starts with this threaded requirements document is too slow. And here's the problem. We didn't realize that data is different. Data is not clean. There is no such thing as data quality. There's just data unquality, right? Whenever you look at data, you learn new things. There's new things in there, and most of them are unexpected. You can't ask a marketing department and say, tell me exactly what you want, and I build it for you. They don't know what they want. They won't tell you what they don't know because it's embarrassing, but they cannot know because they haven't seen the data. So what happens is they read requirements documents that are like, give me all data in all possible combinations with BIs in every drill down because somewhere in there is probably the one thing that I need to run my business, right? And so huge projects, right? And doesn't work at all. What does everybody do? I have a little bit of money here, a little bit of money there, SQL Server, MySQL, MongoDB. It doesn't matter what technology that you use. Give me that data, I'll stick it somewhere, and I'll do it myself. I cannot wait for you guys to do it for me, right? Starts out as agility in mind, right? The problem is it quickly turns into something like this. You all of a sudden have like 2 executives meeting, and I've been in meetings like that, right, where a marketing head and a finance head argued over who has the right numbers. What were the active numbers of customers in the last quarter? Well, we think it was 7.5 million. Well, no, our numbers tell us we only had 4.3 million active users, right? It's like, you will not believe how much of that is going on in enterprises, right? And the problem is we started realizing over the years that there's a problem. We gave it a name. It's called data drift. Whenever you copy data, it drifts. It's stale, it gets outdated, it misses updates, there's data missing from it. We had data marts that we found. My favorite example was our CRM data mart that we had back then that had like 60% of customer data outdated or missing. Right? That's the thing that sends all the coupons out and all the emails to your high-value customers, and it's running on outdated and incorrect data. That's a problem, right? But it doesn't show up on a business line item or on a budget, right? We did some studies, and we found that in many cases in large companies, when you have like analytics teams of like 200, 300 people, as much as 75% of the people time in these teams gets spent on dealing with the fallout of that. Make me another copy of data. Why is my copy of data not in sync? How do you clean up my copy of data? All the fire drills, explain why my numbers don't match up. That's not productive. We're not producing anything new. We're just arguing over what is broken out there, right? And of course we duplicate data, right? And yes, of course, so we take this CRM data mart that was 10 terabytes. Back then that was a big thing, right? And once we had just the 5, 10 largest tables deduped that we already had, it was 500 gigabytes of net new data. It was microscopic, right? Yet we built large systems for that couldn't keep up. The load times of that system started to exceed 24 hours. We had to do something. We had to fix it, right? So we started also realizing that a lot of these new incremental use cases are actually fairly small, right? At least before you start mixing big data into it, right? We came up with this tagline. I've been using this, I think, since 2007, right? Where I've been saying a data mart cannot be cheap enough to justify its existence. What I mean with that is, it doesn't matter what you buy or how free it is. The box that you put out there to put a copy of data on it, that's not the cost. Pick whatever technology you want. That's not the cost. The cost comes after that. The cost comes in people time when 10, 50, 100, 200 people are trying to keep tens, 50s, hundreds of these boxes in sync, right? And if you've ever done budgets at large scale, a 250 people organization is $100 million in people cost every year. And when you consume that to a large percentage with just crap, I have a problem, right? It doesn't matter if that box was cheap all of a sudden anymore. So this is just a warm-up, right, to get us into what's the sentient enterprise. The sentient enterprise is meant to be a North Star, something that, quite honestly, none of us in our lifetimes will most likely ever see. It's what Six Sigma is to quality. It's a goal that you probably will never reach, nor do you want to reach it in absolute terms. But it's something that gives you a North Star to say, what are the capabilities that I need to build to get really good with data, right? And so let me take you through what these stages are. And I'm starting out with a little bit of an oxymoron. That oxymoron we call the agile data warehouse. And we all know the data warehouse is not agile, right? The data warehouse is the anti-agile Christ in companies, right? It's what takes forever, right? It's what sucks a lot of money and whatnot. But the point here is that I'm trying to make is like, you need to get agile with this. The first step that you need to do as an organization is get agile, even with small data. Because when big data arrives or has arrived, it gets 100 times more difficult, right, from here on. Things like governance and whatnot, we need to talk about that here for a second. So we said, okay, so we have this problem. We call it the data warehouse. Everybody hates it. Everybody builds their own silos of data. And by the way, again, doesn't matter if these silos are technology A, B, or C. Pick any of them. if you make it for copies of data so that you have control, you're trying to do something for agility, but it's usually what falls apart like a card house, right? We said, well, but going back to the DDW is not an option either, right? Obviously, we have failed, right? So we need to find something else. We started asking ourselves around 2005, what could we do? And we came up with the following concept. And we called them virtual data marts. And first, actually, we called them prototyping areas, or PETs, right, Annette? And we said we need to give anybody in the company, any business unit, any development team, whatnot, self-control over what they need to do without the need to copy data around. And it was also the time when we started thinking very, very heavily about cloud. And the first answer to this was like, well, just give them a database in the cloud, right? Self-service, provision a database, or nowadays it would not just be a database. No SQL, no SQL, doesn't matter. Give me something in the cloud, I've solved the problem. And we talked through that, and we said, you know what, what's the first thing that if you build, let's say, a database in the cloud, and you log in after 5 minutes, self-provisioned, right? Self-service. What's the first thing that you see in there? Nothing, right? There's no data there. So what's the first thing you have to do? Copy data there. It's like, okay, we just solved the problem that we didn't have to solve, right? So getting this thing up and running is the small problem. Copying data and keeping copies of data in sync, that's the big problem. So we need to do a different approach here. We said we need to build these things where when you open them, yes, they have empty space for you to do stuff, but all the data in the company that you are allowed to see, that you are supposed to see, must be there. It needs to be there. The customer table, the transaction, the search relevance data, the clickstream data, anything that your company has amassed on data must be there from the very first second. If not, you're forced to copy it, and then there's a problem. We also started realizing if we do this as a self-service thing, right, what will prevent people from opening thousands of them, sticking data in there, and it's just like every file server that you open up to a community of people. It fills up in at least half the time that you've expected it to fill up because people put garbage in, right, and it stays there, right? So we said, with every piece of self-service, there needs to come some governance. The first thing that we wrapped around is we said we need to have some time boxing, 30, 60, 90 days. That's what you get, right? And an email that says in 15 days this thing goes away. But also that email has a self-service link in there. Let me extend that for another 30, 60, 90 days. However, if you do that 2 or 3 times, you should probably be on the hot list of some of the architects looking at that, what you're doing with this, right? Because this is a little bit more production than just a prototype that you said it would be. So governance, we started realizing governance is important. The other part was like, well, but we still have our requirements documents, right? We still have the PDLC. How do we get this stuff into now this software development lifecycle that we have out there, right? And we started realizing we need to have a speedboat fast methodology for everybody that shows up with a prototype, right? And we said, well, if you show up with a prototype, we should be able to actually build it into something that's in production much, much faster. We actually, over time, learned that if you show up with a prototype, it's way better than any requirements document ever. Because in the requirements document, you would ask for everything. In a prototype, you have the 2 data sets, tables, files, whatever that you needed to get to a decision point, right? And so really important also to think about going to something like Scrum and Agile methodologies. You need a starting point that has been iterated on, not a requirements document that is huge and way too big to implement. So there's a lot more, but let's keep it at that. The other part that we said is we need to break down data. And we came up with the concept of a layered data architecture, which, by the way, this is not about systems. This is not about how many boxes you need to buy of something. You can do the layered data architecture on a laptop. You can do it on a Hadoop system, on a Teradata system, on a bunch of systems together. The point here is that just like in telecommunications, we have the OSI 7-layer model, everything from the copper to the interfaces, to the drivers, to the applications. You need to delineate what data means to you at different levels. And we started breaking down data in this mean. So we started with layer 0, raw data, right? Get raw data in there. However, raw data doesn't mean to unstructured data. Raw data means you keep data in exactly that form that it came to you, right? Layer 0 is important for lineage. It's your first point where you can recognize where the data came from and what it means. And it needs to be, if it comes out of an XYZ database, it should be exactly in that format in there. If it comes out of clickstream, it should be exactly that format. If it is images or log files, it should be exactly that format. The only task of layer 0 is to preserve exactly what you get in exactly the form. ETL without the T, right? And we're going to get a little bit more into this. No T actually allowed. Because when at 2 o'clock in the morning, jobs break and you are down, right? And you have ETL code that is spaghetti code that does everything before it even lands at you, you have a very hard time even debugging what just went on. You need to have simplicity. You need to be able to go to layer 0. Is the data there? Yes. Does it match what we have there? Yes. Okay, not the problem here. It must be somewhere else, right? Layer 1, integration layer. For way too many years, I was on the wrong path on this thing here. We argued about data models. Ralph Kimball versus Bill Inman, right? And we ended up building 50,000 table data models, right? And ultimately, it's like, it was impossible to maintain back then. Now you put the world of data on top of that. Are you going to model the whole world, really? I mean, do you ever think in your lifetime we will have enough people to do that? No, right? Clearly not. So integration layer becomes less about the religion of data modeling, more about how do you most simplistically integrate data. How do you get the keys right? Because if you can't get the keys right, if you don't know how customer shows up in a click stream, then you have a problem. Then you cannot relate that, right? So the keys need to get right. But the rest is less important. It's a spectrum. There are certain pieces that need to be modeled really well. Your financial reporting will not be done on read-on-the-fly data that changes every day, and therefore your results go up and down, right? But there's other things that you do on new types of data that you haven't understood completely, that you just want to bring in as raw as possible. You get the key right, make it so that you can join it, but keep it as simple as possible. Calculation layer. We made the mistake in the early beginnings to put too much calculation logic into the apps or BI tools, right? Every BI tool out there gives you that wonderful opportunity to say, this equals this times this minus this plus this times this, right? Or much more complex formulas. The problem is all these wonderful users that come with an Excel spreadsheet to you don't have the formula, right? And so they make it up. And more often than not, they get it wrong, right? Because even something like revenue or GMV at a place like eBay is a really complex formula that most people don't even understand. And therefore, you need to have a calculation layer where you say, this is the calculation, it's version controlled. Again, it's a spectrum. Some are gold standard KPIs, and some are just new ones that you are not sure about, and you iterate and you fail fast. Aggregation, here's how you roll it up. By microsegment, by product, by category, by country, by a million different ways that you need, right? And ultimately, you end up at the presentation layer, which is kind of the contract and the API for how the company can expect to see the data when they need to, right? And yes, and then there's data labs, how we call these virtual data marts that need to sit on top of all of that. But if you look over the top here for a second, and by the way, I just picked 4 examples. This is not to say your company has 4 types of users, by no means. And you might call them something completely different, right? Some call them data scientists, some call them something completely different. It doesn't matter. The point here is there's different groups of users that should see differently deep into this data, right? There's a handful of people that need to see the raw data, right? And it needs to be easy and fast. This morning, I have an idea, get the data into layer 0. I don't model. I don't create a data model. I don't create ETL. I just copy the data in there, and I have people immediately looking at that, right? I don't expose it, however, to 95% of the users in the company because it's really dangerous territory if you don't know what you're doing in that kind of data, right? And so there's different levels that you expose there. And it helped us all of a sudden dissect these ETL problems, these data load problems that always became too big. And by the time it was the first time somebody could see it, we didn't know what we have created anymore, right? Layered data architecture is about simplifying, taking small bites so that you can do Scrum, so that you can do a one-week sprint if you need to, and just iterate on that in small steps, right? So the first step is about agility. And when I spoke at Hadoop Summit last year, there was a lot of talk out there about people saying, Agile is no longer fast enough. I cannot wait 30 days. I need it in hours, right? You're right. You're right. However, it's difficult. Agile is not wild, wild west. I see a lot of companies that say, I'm agile, I'm agile. What do? I do daily stand-up meetings. Okay, great. What else? I no longer write documentation and no longer do architecture. I said, this is not agile, this is wild, wild west, right? Because, yes, in the next 30 days, you will do some awesome things. 30 days after that, it gets a little harder. 8 months from now, you are looking at a card house that will come crumbling down on you, right? And the problem that we as organizations have to deal with, we need to build for sustainability. We need to ultimately build something that will last, right? Some things have to change, but this is about moving from a centralized data warehouse to decentralized use cases that can still sit on a centralized set of data. Give me as few copies of data as possible, but decentralize the use cases as much as possible so that we can have a lot. And I think nowadays at eBay, there's probably 1,000 virtual data marts live at any given point in time that people work on and iterate on and try out new things. It's the only way to get through 10,000 hypotheses a year and then build models for some of that and experiments and come out and find the diamonds that really make a difference, right? So, next stage. We call it the behavioral data platform. And by the way, when I say data platform, don't think a box you need to buy. Certainly not something I'm going to sell you. The behavioral data platform is meant to be describing the shift in thinking when a company comes from transactional thinking. Everything is about transactions. How many red shirts did I sell on Monday versus last Monday versus last quarter versus last year, which is all of that wonderful BI that we have built in the world, right? And where all of a sudden we start looking like, well, there's something else, right? I mean, first of all, transactions can be behavioral, but then there's a whole bunch of stuff in between. Because by the time you buy something, right, I mean, that's just one of the things, right? All of a sudden, the company starts shifting its thinking from just counting transactions to like, I want to see these patterns. I want to see people that did something a couple of times that led to a certain outcome. All of a sudden, I'm following a single customer, consumer, or machine, right? And say, why is this thing behaving differently to the other things? Very different. You need different skill sets. Your typical BI dashboards will not work, right? You need algorithms. You need graph. You need path. You need all kinds of things that traditionally we haven't looked at. And of course, it's a lot of data, right? That's why we call it big data. But again, the data volumes are the least of our problems because we have scalable platforms by now. But this is what we're looking at, right? We're looking at series of events that lead to something, a visit, a purchase, a complaint, a whatnot, right? An email that goes out, right? We start structuring that as a company now into behaviors. This was when at eBay we started focusing all of a sudden on, behaviors, and we need to, if we want to change behaviors, it's quite difficult. Before it was easy. We took the smartest person in the room and we said the button needs to be red or green. The smartest person said it needs to be green. We made it green, right? All of a sudden, when you focus on behaviors, the outcome is really, really subtle and really, really hard to predict. And so all of a sudden we built experimentation, right? Multivariant testing. How about we run 100 experiments? Each experiment has 5 variants, and we actually measure, right? We look at a change in search relevance, and we look what it does to the customers that do it, right? We also started realizing, oh my God, search relevance. What's the problem here, right? In 2007, by the way, if you were to go on the eBay website and you would search for an iPod, it was pretty much guaranteed that the first 2 pages didn't have an iPod. Why? Because enough sellers around the world got really good in keyword spamming, right? As we nowadays know, right? This iPod, green sleeve, iPod, right? And naturally, our search stuff would bring this up, right? Really sucks from a customer perspective, right? If I don't find what I want on the first 2 pages, see ya, gonna go somewhere else, right? And so we started saying, oh, we need to measure that, right? How do we find that missing thing in there? It's like, well, we have clickstream data. Well, that should help us, right? Clickstream data. We can, oh, somebody's on a search page, except it didn't dawn on us before then that the web has become so dynamic that the search result, of course, is so dynamic that every 5 seconds is a completely new search result, right? And so it's like, well, so do we store the search result for every click? No. Why? I mean, it's huge amounts of data. It's like, well, we can't do search relevance if we don't know exactly what we put in front of you, right? Versus what we put in front of you. And so all of a sudden, like, we needed to add tags into Clickstream that had all 50 things in there. All of a sudden, like 3 billion page views turn into 150 billion search impressions. Talk about big data and talk about, oh, shit, this is now This is now really difficult, right? So behavioral explosion. And all of a sudden, like when you combine this around all of this agility that you're building, there's a lot of behavioral analytics all of a sudden, like blossoming, right? Coming up. We define more and more behaviors. Now, the problem with that is we weren't good at metadata to begin with, right? Go find a data warehouse in the world that has good metadata. Good luck, right? Doesn't exist, right? Now add sandboxes, data labs to this thing where others are in control, gets downhill very fast. And now talk behavioral. Who describes the behaviors really well so that you can actually find something? It gets a lot more complex, right? We also started realizing that in this layered data architecture, we introduced the concept of semi-structured data modeling. We realized that we need to bring in name-value pairs, XML, JSON, into the data models. And you know what? We need to analyze who is using them, how often, to do data modeling after the fact. But data modeling still needs to happen, right? It's an important thing that when you make something a KPI, when you make something a repeatable process, you need to wrap governance around it. The difference, however, here is you don't try to do it up front when you have no idea what you're doing with it. You're doing as you see people using the data, and then you evolve it. Okay, so this is all about the move from transactional thinking to behavioral thinking. And those of you data scientists, right, you know exactly what I'm talking about, right? This is difficult for companies because guess what? It takes the CEO and the board and everybody else to change their thinking, right? It dawned on us when we were thinking about net promoter score that this thing is a very different animal than revenue and profit. And yes, ultimately, it will lead, hopefully, to better revenue and profit, but it's a very different animal, right? And the whole company needs to change. So let's talk about the third stage. We call it the collaborative ideation platform. Big words, right? You can tell Kellogg's influence in this here. This is about collaboration. This is about the fact that it's getting tougher and tougher. As we said, we're doing all this agile, we're doing all of these behavioral models, experimentation. Now mix people into this, right? Now onboard a new data scientist. And it will take you a year before that person has a clue. What do you mean there's 600,000 tables on that system or files, right? What do you mean we have 1,000 behaviors in the company? Where can I read about them? And like, we are sorry, right? You can talk to this person and to that person, and all of a sudden, like, it's really burdensome, right? And we started realizing we need to do something about that. And that even, by the way, this is not a screenshot. This is just a mock-up. We ultimately created what we call the Data Hub, and think of it as LinkedIn for analytics. Think of it as GitHub for analytics, right? Whatever your favorite collaboration thing is, you need it around data, right? We needed to be able to collaborate on that and follow people along what they're doing, right? Look at what people are doing so that we can show other people what is important. Build a search index of everything, right? Follow along what needs to be done. Enable storytelling. Enable Q&A forums, right? Stack Exchange, you like that for whatever you're doing? To learn more about R or Python? Well, you need the same thing about analytics within a company, right? Because otherwise you have no idea who has done and solved something before, right? Yeah, we didn't invent that, but we started realizing that crowdsourcing, even within the company, is becoming really important, right? Collaboration, crowdsourcing, I need to be able to search, analyze, I need to be able to like something. And every little like out there gives me a little hint that something is a little bit more important than things that people don't look at, right? And ultimately, I need to have the capability as a company to say, people that look at this data set also look at the following data sets, right? And that's very different from having somebody trying to find and ask for everything, because most people in the company at that stage will no longer know what to ask for, right? You need to start pushing information to them, just like your favorite social environments do. Yes, we didn't invent it. Yes, there's very good examples, right? One of my favorite ones here in San Francisco is Kaggle, right? Data science competitions, right? Give me a data set, give me a test set, give me a result set, give me money, and I'll be interested. And the more money you put behind it, the more people you get on top of that. And they didn't invent it. These guys did. Well, they didn't invent it, but they put their money where their mouth was, right? 2009, Netflix price, $1 million. Show up with an algorithm that is at least X% better at predicting what the next of your favorite movies is, and we will pay you $1 million. That's a powerful thing, right? And they got what they needed, and they did it a couple times more, right? And they made improvements that internally they could have never accomplished, right? But we need that even in our own companies. We need that sort of thinking, of crowdsourced thinking, because when you mix big data in all of this, when you have 1 million data sets or tables or files, there's no human being anymore that has it all in their head. There's no metadata solution anymore that has it all cataloged, right? So you need to build a crowdsourced environment. And yes, the other part, by the way, that you need to do is, and the reason why I bring this up in here is that the more you build self-service, the more you let people iterate by themselves, the more you need clickstream about what they're doing. If you build a self-service web page, if you have any web page, most of you have, right? Of course, your people look at clickstream. Who is using what pages, clicking where, buying what, abandoning what, right? When you do analytics in self-service, you need to follow along every query, every MapReduce job, everything that is ever run to understand what people are doing with the data. Because the moment you open the door of self-service, you will have even less control about what's going on. And if you don't have analytics about analytics on top of that, you will be lost. You will not know why capacity is gone, why things are inefficient, why SLAs are being missed, why people are combining all of a sudden these data sets with each other, right? Really important part. Okay, stage 3, collaboration. Think LinkedIn for analytics, right? Bring in crowdsourced collaboration. And by the way, when I was at eBay and I talked about that, and quite often people walked up after a presentation to me and said, well, you're eBay, right? You are a Bay Area startup company. No longer, but I mean, close enough. You can do that. I work in an 80, 100-year-old company. Never, ever is that going to happen to us, right? And so this is when, working for Sears for a while, we built the equivalent of the Data Hub in 90 days. 2 open source developers, open source software. You get the CMS out there. You get the social stuff out there. We integrated Elasticsearch behind it. We did Tableau, MicroStrategy, whatever our favorite tool was, and indexed it and put it all together. Is it perfect? No. But it was a huge stepping stone into this capability, right? So, next thing is, okay, so we're agile. We're much more behavioral than we have been before. We collaborate really well. We find more. We find all these wonderful insights, right? And I often walk into companies and see wonderful graphs and visualizations on the walls, right? Whenever I see a visualization on the wall, my first inclination is like, well, that looks like art, right? The problem is businesses don't run well on art, right? And the problem that we quite often get ourselves into is we find something, we even email it to somebody, look what we found, and that's where it stops. Because, of course, our ETL teams are busy, our development teams are busy, get in line, make a business case, and if you can't prove that it gets us 50 times more than what it costs, you don't even have a chance to get the capital or headcount or whatnot, right? The problem is we're so heavyweight that we always have to rely on some other complex team to deliver. This is where App Platform comes in for analytics. And just as I started out with Robert Ney, there's platforms out there that have shown us, right, how to do things very easily. Almost everyone in this room, if you take a day or two, is able to write an iPhone app, right, and get it published on the App Store, unless you do something really forbidden or against the policies or whatnot, right? But every one of you, right? And we're not the experts, right? We don't barely know the programming languages. To get a Hello World app, this is easy. Try to get a Hello World app on whatever your analytics application platform is that you have or don't have today, or petabyte-sized system. It takes teams. It's difficult. So we need to change that. We need to get to the zero-cost deployment model, right, where one of my favorite examples is we used to roll out new code for analytics every last Thursday of the month, right? And when you do that, every last Friday of the month becomes cleanup Friday for everything that you broke Thursday night, right? And if you do that, you get 10 chances a year, right? Because Christmas you don't do it, Thanksgiving you don't do it, right? So you get 10 chances a year. Most developers that participate in that stuff do it once or twice out of that, right? Anything that you do once a month, once a quarter, once a year, you never get good at, right? no matter how much process you wrap around, how many Excel spreadsheets you build, like do this step and then this step. DBAs, you create these tables, right? Admins, you create these file sets and these directories. ETL developers, you copy these scripts, right? BI developers, you release these following universes or whatnot, right? It always breaks. It always breaks, right? It's horrible. And it breaks so often that we are scared of doing it. And we can't even think of doing it more often because we're scared of doing it to begin with. We need to get to a point where we can deploy 1,000 times a day. We need to deploy to 400,000 machines in a day, right? This is cloud, this is DevOps. That needs to come to analytics, right? You need to package something up where deployment is part of the app, not a DBA's job or a sysadmin's job, right? And you need to build DevOps into it where the version of that thing running is a call to Git telling you this is the commit level, this is the label on it, and that's part of the metadata that goes into the stream of this is what's running right now. Because when there is a problem Monday morning, you need to go and say, what just changed? And we all know when we go into our organizations that whenever something changes and breaks, everybody says, nothing changed. We didn't change anything, right? Nothing, right? And then you look at it like, well, oh, somebody's running 1,000,000 times more queries here. Oh, we didn't realize. Oh, I guess we did change something, right? The problem is it's a needle in the haystack problem today, and because of that we are scared. We need DevOps. We need to find this with data, right? And this is also where analytics about analytics really needs to happen. One of the examples that we did at this at a retail company is like, I was in a lot of board meetings and started realizing that people talk about groups of customers a lot, right? All the executives. Oh, people that bought diapers more than 5 times last year. Or people that moved last year. Or people that bought enough bananas and then bought Coke, right? I would like to know what they're doing, right? It doesn't matter what it is. It's all customer segments, right? Yet, the company had maybe 5, 7 customer segments under control. VIP Gold, VIP Silver, VIP Bronze. And then maybe 2 or 3 more, right? And if I would have gone to my analytics teams and said, instead of 7 segments, I want 14, they would have said, I need some headcount, right? Because we need to write twice as many ETL jobs to do this. And I said, we're going to do this now very different. We build ourselves an app platform, and we built the most primitive one in a couple of weeks with DevOps, with real-time data instrumentation. And we said, I want a customer segmentation engine that can create 1,000,000 customer segments, right? And everybody looked at me like deer staring at headlight in oncoming traffic, right? Like, are you crazy, right? Who would need 1,000,000 customer segments? And what would we do if we had 1,000,000 segments? I said, that's not the point. The point is, you don't do 7 times how many is 1,000,000, and that's how many more headcounts you need, because you will realize you can't ask for another 500 people of headcount to build this thing. So we need a different approach on this, right? I need an app that is a small app that can run, that we feed with metadata, and we let everybody in the company feed it with more metadata. And within 6 weeks, we had an app up and running to do customer segmentation on 50 customer segments. In 90 days, we had 1,000 customer segments up and running. Because the segment definitions didn't come from my team. They came from everybody else in the company all of a sudden. But what the segmentation engine did is, it ran every day. It calculated every segment, all KPIs for every segment, and it built a time series. And we actually ran it back 2 years in time. And all of a sudden, like, we could visualize how segments are growing and shrinking, how people are migrating from one segment to another. These are questions that were previously really difficult to answer. And by the way, when marketing looked at the segments and the counts of customers in it and finance did, they actually got the same numbers, right? But this is app thinking. You can't do this in traditional ETL terms, right? The second problem that we have is we have all these people in the companies requesting data. I need data, right? And we have a handful of people, some of you, most likely, ETL developers, if at least you have done it once in your life, where you're being told, hey, there's a system out there, go get that data, right? And by the way, here's the spec of that data. And everybody who has ever done this knows that the spec never looks like what the data is, right? What do you mean there's 5 values in gender code, right? You said there is a lot of data. There's 98% nulls in this thing, right? It is always different than we thought what it is, right? The problem here is the people that we send out to get that data is the poor aftermath of what happened before. That person doesn't know about the data. We ask them to drill holes in big mountains and then suck it out and then be surprised if it doesn't match what they were told to be, right? The problem is we do too much analytics and data mining and data science after the fact. We build new products, and then we roll them out, and we say, oh, how are we going to analyze this? Oh, I guess we need to build something. Go ask the ETL team to get the data, and then we build some stuff on it. Doesn't work. So over the years, we came up with the realization we need to turn this upside down. And we started building ourselves a data listening platform. And when I say data listening platform, most of you have had a little website, a little blog, whatever, right? If you ever want to measure what's going on that little blog, website, whatever it is, what do? One of the choices is you go to Google, log in, Google Analytics. What do you get? An API key and a 5-line JavaScript tag that says copy. You go to your HTML paste, you say paste, right? Save. And the very next click from that website shows up in a real-time chart. Nobody has ever written ETL for your website, right? Nobody tried to drill a hole into it. Somehow your site is sending data to somebody who's listening, right? Now think about that at the enterprise scale, right? This is capability that we need to do at the enterprise. It needs to be self-service. Any development team, whether it's iPhone, whether it's website, whether it is mainframe or whatever it is, needs to be able to say, hey, I need to instrument my app to emit data. No, I don't want to learn about special buses and proprietary formats. We've moved past that. The world today is RESTful and JSON, right? Give me an API key, give me a one-liner for the top 20 programming languages, and I'm going to stick my JSON document straight in there. I just need the other side to listen to me and catch it, right? So the beauty is here, self-service needs to then say, I want this to put into Hadoop, into MongoDB, Cassandra, HBase, Teradata, whatever the platform of your choice is that you want to put it in there. And ultimately, we need that layered data architecture because data listening is really, really targeting layer 0, right? All of a sudden, yeah, JSON. Okay, we stick the JSON documents in there, just like it is. We're going to give some people a chance right then and there, 5 seconds later, to run the first query and say, did the data come through? And by the way, if you're really successful with doing that, your front-end developers, web developers, application developers, mobile developers will start misusing this platform. They will start using it for debugging, right? They will start placing markers into their code. It's like, why is this not working? Which, by the way, that's the best success you can have, right? This is widespread adoption all of a sudden, right? And all of a sudden, like, you have millions of events per second. And you need to deal with that, right? And so you need to size for that. So clearly, there's some governance that you need to do. By the way, this is also a lesson learned. Whenever you land name-value pair JSON data, right? To build a prototype off of it is great. To build repeatable things off of that is quite a different thing. Because if you are not in control what the tags are that go into this, if it's another development team that controls the tags, and oh my God, I called it name yesterday, today I call it last name, right? Everything you built off that name-value pair name stops working. Well, that's an easy one. That you find. The problem is, if they have a tag called XYZ, and all of a sudden they use it slightly different, right? All of a sudden, like, the data looks like it's all good, it's all garbage, right? And that's the difficult one. This is where governance needs to go all the way up. We talked about data engines, processing about this thing. This needs to be apps, right? Mashups, right? I want to put that into a D3 visualization. Give me an API, RESTful, let me stream the JSON data into a visualization. And, by the way, I want to write an app where I can right-click on whatever that bar is and say, send that population to the next system, right? This is where we usually end up, or before we get to that, because we build a visualization and then it's like, so what? In the visualization, I can't take any action. I can take a screenshot. I can paint my walls with it. I can even email it to it, but that doesn't create any output, right? So, apps platform, this is where cloud DevOps needs to meet analytics, right? This is really where you go to zero-cost deployment, where you need to be able to run thousands of apps, and you need to know all the apps and all the versions that are running and where they're coming from and who has done what and who has changed what. And we're scared of that because in analytics, that's usually not how we think, right? But it's an important part to get to that. Data listening. We need to have a listening platform where in addition to good old school ETL, we can also sit there and say, whatever people register, we're going to take it us, right, in real time. And luckily, we have technologies, Kafka, Spark, whatever, right, that help us build these kind of capabilities nowadays, right? And which takes us to the last one, and I know I'm running out of time here very quickly. We call it autonomous decisioning platform. And the thing here is that today we spend 90% of our time sifting through data. Right? If you're in a company that, let's say, has 100 million customers, let's say you have 50,000 categories of products, let's say you're doing business in 100 plus countries in the world, right? Let's say you have 400 million live products out there or whatnot. If you multiply through all the combinations of all KPIs and all intersections and all drill downs, you probably are in the millions, if not billions, of combinations. How many eyeballs do you think will check every combination of everything every morning? Well, and by the way, by the time we have looked at a certain chart or visualization 5 times in a row and nothing has changed, we park it. We no longer look at it. Right? This is the problem when now things start running away on us. When all of a sudden something happens somewhere in data and we don't see it. Right? This is where some of the leading companies are doing some really interesting work, because the goal is, how do we turn this around? How do we spend 90% of our analyst times actually making decisions, not sifting through data? Right? And this is where algorithms need to come in a different way, however, than solving just a churn problem or a fraud problem. Right? We have very isolated instances of algorithms out there. Yes, we do search relevance, right? Yeah, we do fraud. Yes, we do infosec. We do highly trained models. The problem is the whole data set is very different. We need to adopt concepts of algorithms in a very different way. Just like the self-driving car takes care of situations that are unforeseen, right? And helps us get to something better. Just like we have seen automated trading, which the world of trading nowadays is run by algorithms. Human beings train them, right? They make the decisions. But the millions of trades every second, these are algorithms. We need that capability within the company. We need to know when something drifts away on us. The system needs to tell us, here are the top 3 things that you should be looking at this morning, right? Out of the billions of possible combinations. Because there's just not enough people around to look at everything all the time, right? And so this is really the ability to start putting the company back together as kind of a single organism, right? We human beings, by definition, are sentient, right? We listen in real time, right? The left hand knows what the right hand is doing, right? We learn, especially when we are that age, right? We fall a lot, we learn a lot, right? We get better at that. The more of us you put together, just this room in here, we get really bad at all these things, right? By the time I tell you a story and you tell it and you tell, by the time it comes out at the end, it sounds like completely different, right? And so the point here is that with the Sentient Enterprise, we're looking at a North Star of capabilities that when you build on them, right? And by the way, they're not linear. You don't do 1 first and then 2 and then 3. You do bits and pieces of these things. And some of you might decide to go really far in some of the capabilities. Some of you might say, this is good enough, right? But it's meant to be a roadmap that is beyond tactical thinking. So many executives that I talk around the world are buried in tactical, what do I get done this week, next week? What technology should I buy, right? Is it this or that? And all of you know things are moving so fast. We need something that we can focus on and march towards that helps us develop that. So just to summarize on this, the 5 stages. Agile with data. If you can't be agile with small data, big data will just consume you, right? It gets a lot harder from there. This is moving to a balanced, decentralized framework where, yes, you want use cases on a decentralized level, data as much as possible in a single copy, right? You want to avoid that overhead of dealing with that. Behavioral platform. You need to change the company from transactional thinking to behavioral thinking. And it sounds so easy, but this is not about you, all of you understanding the difference between transactions and behaviors. It's everybody in the company, right? The call centers, the marketing people, everybody needs to understand this, right? Collaboration, linked info analytics, right? How do we get to crowdsourced collaboration within a company, right? Really important. Metadata, that like we tried to do it in the 1990s or 2000s, fails. Doesn't work. Data models don't work like that, right? So if we can't have somebody centralized that documents everything, then we need to have a whole company to help us with that. Analytical application, this is really about agile self-service app development and deployment, right? How do I get 100 lines of code that make a difference out there quickly, right? And if in many cases, good app platforms allow you to build very small things very quickly and push them and run them, right? And yes, change them 100 times a day if you need to, right? It's also about enterprise listening, right? We cannot hire enough ETL people. Doesn't matter if you run on Hadoop, doesn't matter what it is, the platform is that you're running on, you will not find enough human beings that go find all that data. You need to turn this upside down and say, everybody who emits data, who builds sensors, who builds applications, needs to stick it into whatever the listening platform is, right? And finally, predictive technologies for not just predicting the outcome of a purchase or an upsell or a churn or a fraud event, but to look at data and enable us human beings to find changes in signals, right? Rather than sifting through data. Okay, no change, no change, no change, no change. Oh, here's something. Oh, no, nothing, right? Really important, right? And so these 5 stages, that's what we call the sentient enterprise. It's all about very natural behaviors that we all have that, however, are really difficult to implement in companies, right? It's all about, ultimately, agility, right? Time to market, moving faster in an exponential world that is just running away on us. And we see it in the consumer world, however, we have really a hard time internally in technology to deal with that. And with that, I'd like to thank you for coming to listen to me today and hear the Sentient Enterprise. And if there's any questions, I think we have a microphone here, and I'd be happy to take questions either right now or even after that.
I can ask a tough question to you. I come from this space. I come from OLTP and BI background, and everything that you said I agreed with. If your model of generating revenue was from an ROI to a customer, and you said that I'll take 1/3 of the savings that you get, how many accounts would you get by selling the solution?
So here's the thing. This is not something you can sell or buy. You can't buy Six Sigma. You can make it your goal to be like that, and you can educate people, and it will most likely take you years. The idea of this is not to sell you something. The idea of this is not a product list of buy this and you are this. It's not going to happen. The idea of that is like every one of these companies, just take agility. It's difficult. And we need to educate everybody in the company that it is difficult. And by the way, there's no such company that will be completely agile. It's a balance. There's things that are better done in waterfall, right? You don't build a nuclear power plant agile. You don't build an airplane in agile, right? You don't upgrade a data center in agile. We learned that the hard way, right? There's certain things where process is absolutely paramount because of quality, availability, and the predictable outcome. But then there are things where it's much more R&D and learning about things and the unknown. And that's where waterfall and processes fall flat on their face. That's where agile. So even just that first little thing about becoming agile with data is a journey that most companies will take years to go. I'm not talking about training 2 teams, 7 people each on how to use Scrum. That you can get done by end of next week, right? That doesn't change the behavior of the company. That doesn't change the fact that going to the budget committee to get the next $100,000, $1 million, $10 million, whatever the scale is by default a non-agile process, right? So this is really about talking about capabilities that you need to build to be good at that. Doesn't matter what technology that you buy. Certain technologies will help you in certain cases, right? But ultimately, it's about what you need to set out to accomplish, and you need to have a plan that lasts more than a year. You need to have a plan. I recently gave a talk like this to the CIO of one of the big German auto manufacturers. And it was meant to take an hour. And it became so interactive with him that we spent almost 3 hours on that. And he said, you know what? You're giving me the next 6 to 10 years of where I need to head, right? And yes, I want to do it in small increments. And yes, I want to do it in 30 days increments. But I need to think out there, right? I need to think where I have to be, not the tactical things. And that's what is meant with that, right? So what we're trying to do, and why I'm doing this is, I want to give the industry, I want to give people that think about big data and analytics an end goal to shoot for, right? And many of you will do it in different ways, and that's perfectly okay, right? I'm not here to sell you a product. I'm not here to sell you this as a solution. This is, again, as I said, this is what zero inventory is to supply chain, what Six Sigma is to quality. It really is meant to give you a North Star. This is how I need to design myself in order to get there.
What do you think is the biggest philosophical change that you find that stands in the way of this kind of implementation?
The biggest challenge is cultural. I'm not sure if that's philosophical, but the biggest challenge is cultural. Because whenever you work in a certain way, to change that way is very difficult. And it goes all the way from the bottom all the way to the top. I see enough CEOs in the world that say, time to market is everything. We need to move faster. Yet, what they live and breathe every day is large-scale waterfall, right? And it's like, even you, dear executive, you need to think a little bit different in these terms, right? You need to allow for this to happen. You need to make the room in the organization. Don't abandon everything, right? And yes, there is Wall Street. And yes, they want quarterly results. And you can't forget about that or you will be in trouble. But you need to create the room within organizations at every level, right? To say, how do I invest into this? How do I learn and teach myself about this? How do I fail fast? How do I build simple solutions? And yes, how do I embrace failure, right? Some of the greatest leaders out there that I have seen is like, they embrace fail fast. They say, go try out things, and the ones that don't work out, we learn from, right? Mm-hmm. And there's other leaders that say, oh, this needs all to happen in one project, right? Yes, it's going to take 18 months. Failure is not an option. The kind of behavior that you breed, right, with that is like, people will just not tell it to your face, even if they fail, right? Because failure is not an option. Mm-hmm. And so it's a cultural thing more than anything else, I think. It's behavioral. It's how you challenge current financing, budgeting, ROI models, right? Because you need to think a step beyond that. And a company that starts thinking about net promoter score instead of just revenue and profit is halfway down that path, right? A happy customer, yes, will ultimately make more money for me, right, than a disgruntled customer. But I need to measure it. I need to do something about it. I need to learn what works. And by the way, this is where experimentation platform really is important. You will try out things that simply will not work. But you need to learn from them. And by the way, you might want to retry them 3 years later because they didn't work back then because the economy was shitty, right? They could be the biggest gold mine if you try them again, right? So failure can't be a threat. And for that, you need to build an organization that is capable of dealing with that.
You have to deconstruct why did you fail?
Yes.
What were the factors in that?
Yes.
Thank you very
much. And you shouldn't wait 18 months to figure out that there's failure. You should do it in the next 2 weeks or 30 days or 90 days, right? I mean, whatever the incrementals are. Okay. One more question? Okay.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting. And so it's just a kind of like, with the example you gave, and so for example, like if you want to dig out what is relevant data, maybe for the customer's kind of like segment, it could be possible it's you don't know, and so what kind of data is available. And so how you could kind of dig out that kind of issues.
I have to give a lot of credit to a chief scientist that was hired at our company years ago that said, ultimately, we can no longer afford to throw away data. Because just because we don't know the question to ask today doesn't mean some of you will come tomorrow and ask that question. And my answer to you will be, you have to wait 13 months before I can give you an answer. Because just because something is 2% up over the next 1 week could mean disaster or the greatest success. You don't know. There's a seasonal pattern in everything, right? He later on revised his statement and said, it's 9/4 of data that I need on everything. Because 2008 has proven to us that when the economy tanks, seasonal patterns go down the toilet. We have proven to ourselves that with every new product feature, we destroy seasonality. Because when you roll out a new product feature, some people will hate it and some people will love it. Right there, you destroy seasonality. So all of a sudden, we were looking, everything must be 2 years plus, so that you can at least put two patterns over each other, normalize them a little bit, so that you have a decent answer, right? And so this led at eBay to what we called Project Singularity, where we said we need to build a platform that's 100 times larger, right? This is why eBay has databases that are tens of petabytes, coupled with tens of petabytes of Hadoop clusters, right? Coupled together, right, to do analytics at scale, but to, most importantly, collect data and not throw it away, right? And once you start tagging against clickstream with something like every search item ever displayed, every merchandising item ever displayed, every advertising ever displayed, what happens to be 10 billion clicks all of a sudden become a couple 100 billion events in a day. And it's really big, right? And you better do it cost effective, but you better do it in a way where you can still access it and do something with that. Okay, so one more question, then I really have to leave.
Great talk, Oliver. Now, in terms of Sentient Enterprise, are there examples of companies, because this seems like utopia. It'll take them forever to get there. Are there examples that you have, or at the same time, some kind of a investment required to go from point A to point B? Any ideas?
So the second part, the investment required totally depends on the scale and totally depends on what you're doing, right? Sometimes it's a very small investment. To get a crowdsourced linked info analytics up and running, I can nowadays do this probably with 1 or 2 people with open source software. Get myself a PHP, whatever based CMS with social in it and get it up and running very quickly. And for internal scale, it will be easily large enough, right? So investment is not so much the problem. Examples, yeah, there is examples, right? We invented I'm not sure if we can claim that, but we came up with the concept of virtual data marts and sandboxes at eBay in 2005.
2005, yeah, I was there with you.
And it took a couple of years to actually make them work, right? Collaboration, we implemented it there, right? Nowadays, so I've given this talk the first time last year at an event at the Masters in Augusta. There happened to be 2 VPs from Disneyland Resort there. And they came to me afterward and said, this is amazing, and we love that story. We love the language that you're using. This is the Disney way of describing the future, right? So I said, that means a lot, thank you. But what came next was, he said, we just built a listening platform. And I said, tell me more. He said, yeah, so for the last 5 years, we have been working on this multi-billion-dollar change at Disney World, where, by the way, if you haven't been to Disney World lately, you have kids, go do yourself a favor and go there. If you don't know, they have the Magic Band nowadays, right? So if you sign up, you stay at one of their resorts, they send you a Magic Band for you and everybody in your family. Pick the color, pick the favorite Disney icon on top of it. Your name will be on it. Near field and long field RFID. You can check into the hotel, open your hotel room, get into any park, buy anything at any concession stand, eat food wherever you want. That's all great. More importantly, you can pre-plan, fast-track your day the night before in the hotel room on that screen. Say, I want to do this first and then this, and this. And they will guarantee you less than 15 minutes of wait time, right? And by the way, yes, if you lose your children, they're going to find them for you, right? Nice little side effect, right? But so, a really interesting concept, right? And when they started implementing and architecting that, they said, oh my God, the amount of touch points this little device will touch is like, we have to write ETL into what? The doorknob system of the hotels and the registration system of this and the ticketing system of that. No, we need to turn this upside down. We need to build a listening platform that is reachable from all of these systems within Disney, that places the data whenever this thing shows up into our listener, right? And he said, the only thing that we didn't do right, he said, was we didn't do it RESTful and JSON. Now that you hear you talk about how this all needs to be open, right? We did it in binary format, and therefore it can only listen to data from this thing. And all of a sudden we have all these other use cases. It would be so great to listen to, but different formats of data doesn't fit into this thing, right? So it's also important to pick the right technologies. And luckily we have RESTful, we have JSON, right? So that's that. There's examples about signal detection out there. The one that is right now out in open source is Twitter just 2 months ago open sourced an R package for generic signal detection. And the example that they use is exactly that use case. We have so much data, so many pages, so many different data sets. We need an algorithm that tells us where the outliers are so that we can send a human being to look at that, right? And there's other companies, some talk about it in public, others don't talk about it in public, right? Because it's also a competitive advantage. But I'm actually working with Mohan on a book on this, and we're actually right now going out to some of these thought leaders and companies to bring in example stories into that so that we can lead with examples of people that are doing that.
Great. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We look forward for your book.